So, what are the different types of pop-up user licenses? Well, there's the pop-up retail user, there's the pop-up food establishment user, Tier 1, and there's the Tier 2 and Tier 3. Now, let's do a deep dive. On the first license type, which is the pop-up retail user, it really is actually has been in existence for a bit. It's our current itinerant merchants that was renamed as pop-up retail user. What this allows the licensee to do is to occupy or lease for up to 1 year or less a fixed indoor retail space for the sale of merchandise or provision of services, including but not limited to seasonal stores, estate sales, trade shows, or exhibitions. The next pop-up food establishment user type is Tier 2. And in addition to selling or serving food authorized under the Tier 1 license, the holder of a Tier 2 license is entitled to sell or serve any combination of perishable and non-perishable hot or cold prepackaged food that has been prepared and packaged or stored off-site in a licensed shared kitchen or shared kitchen supplemental. Final on-site preparation involving minimal assembly is allowed, and on-site dining is allowed under a Tier 2 license. The last pop-up food establishment user license is the Tier 3 license. The Tier 3, in addition to selling or serving food that's authorized under Tier 1 and Tier 2, the holder of Tier 3 license is entitled to sell or serve perishable, non-perishable, hot and cold food prepared on-site at the pop-up food establishment. So essentially, this is like a restaurant.
As part of the consultation, she's also going to ask you what product you plan to sell, right? And if that location meets the requirements of the product that you plan to sell, and how you plan to sell it. So she's going to ask you about the equipment that you plan to provide or the equipment that the host is going to provide, right? Because according to the ordinance, either party can be responsible for providing the equipment. It can either be the host or it can be the user for a Tier 2. As a user, you're not actually subject to inspection except for under these three circumstances. If you are in a host location, we always reserve the right to inspect any place where there's food, and you happen to be there, you can get inspected at that point. If you are part of a foodborne illness outbreak, does everybody know what that means? That means that if somebody says, I got sick because I ate your food product, and then we're gonna come and do an inspection, and we're gonna try to figure out what your process is and do an investigation.
The holder of a Tier 2 host license is authorized to allow pop-up food establishment user Tier 1 and Tier 2. So as you'll notice, as the tiers go up, you are allowed to allow the accommodating pop-up users tiers and a number less, right? So therefore, the Tier 1 and Tier 2 license holders are allowed to operate in the Tier 2 establishment.
Remember Tier 1? Does anybody know?
Retail.
Because it's retail and packaged foods only. Do we inspect those places? No.
Chips and juice.
So if you have, the Tier 1 is just going to be your chips and juice. You get chips in small bags. It's your candy store, your local candy store where everything is prepackaged. You get it from the manufacturer that way. You sell it that way. That makes sense? That's going to be your Tier 1. So we won't talk about that because there's no additional requirements for that. So we're just going to talk about the Tier 2s and the Tier 3 for hosts. Is that okay? All right, so the Tier 2, I kind of talked about a little bit when I kind of integrated that with the user, meaning that the Tier 2, if this room is your space that you own and a Tier 2 wants to be in this space, they also must have a hand sink if they have any open food products, right? So as the host, you can be responsible for providing that hand sink. And if they're having hot or cold foods, then you can be responsible for providing that hot or cold holding units. You can be responsible for that. If you're a Tier 3, we're talking full-blown restaurant. So restaurants often fail and they end up with empty restaurants, right? So if you own that restaurant and you want to lease that space to a Tier 3 user, this is going to be your full-blown restaurant. They have to comply with, that space has to comply with all parts of the food code. So that's 3-compartment sinks, hand sinks, service sinks, hot holding equipment, everything, logbooks, all of the requirements.